Olá, boa tarde a todos e a todas. É um prazer muito grande receber vocês aqui no Cenpec. Nós temos hoje aqui uma grande parte da nossa equipe, mas também temos convidados. E a ideia para nós é sempre interessante, é sempre muito bom abrir as portas do Cenpec para receber as pessoas, para trocar ideias, experiências, para promover o debate, a conversa. Eu estava conversando com a professora Pamela Mason um pouquinho antes, e eu disse para ela que é uma plateia que geralmente gosta muito de perguntar, de opinar, de discutir. Então, por favor, a gente espera que depois da palestra dela realmente possa haver uma troca e um espaço para o debate, né? Bem, nós queríamos esse debate, esse evento é uma iniciativa da Coordenação de Pesquisa do Cenpec, né, em parceria com a Fundação Vitor Tivita. Então, a Ângela está aqui, Ângela Dahnemann. Queria agradecer à Fundação Vitor Tivita por essa parceria, é muito bom, né, trabalhar junto. E queria também agradecer muito o CAED, né, a Josi Toledo está aqui. E sem o apoio de vocês não teria sido possível para nós e para a Fundação trazer a Pamela e promover esse encontro. Então, queria agradecer esses parceiros, agradecer a presença e, sobretudo, agradecer Pamela. Muito obrigada. Thank you very much to be with us. Eu já tive a oportunidade de conversar com ela, nós jantamos juntas ontem, almoçamos hoje, e eu tenho certeza que ela vai trazer contribuições bastante interessantes. Então, Dutti, vou passar a palavra para o Dutti.
Para não jogar? Bora.
Eu fico aqui, você fica lá.
Vai
lá também.
Eu e a Ângela vamos fazer um jogral para apresentar. You know what's jogral? It's something that we used to do at school. For a principal.
One starts the sentence, the other continues the sentence.
Yes. Okay.
And then
Acho que assim tá bom.
Yes.
Não, ele ficou na frente não.
Together, very uneducated and polished.
We start? Or
You do.
Okay.
I'll follow.
Bom, é um prazer receber vocês. Muito obrigado pela presença. É uma honra apresentar a Pamela para vocês. Eu vou contar hoje rapidamente uma história que aconteceu em 2004 ou 2005. Eu li um livro que me impressionou muito, que se chamava Práticas Promissoras em Urban Education. Urban Education é engraçado para nós, porque a educação urbana, a gente fica pensando, deve ser o oposto de educação rural, né? Mas que é o equivalente para nós de educação, quase que educação na periferia, né? Enquanto nos Estados Unidos a periferia, ou subúrbio, é o lugar onde moram os ricos, né? A inner city, a urban education, é o lugar onde moram as populações mais pobres. Então é o lugar das vizinhanças ou dos territórios justamente mais vulneráveis, e que é justamente a nossa área de pesquisa. E hoje, por acaso, eu me lembrei que aquele livro que eu tinha lido em 2005, 2006, era um livro editado pela Pamela. E aí foi uma grata satisfação reencontrar essa Pamela hoje, depois de tê-la reencontrado em 2011.
2011 was when you met?
Yes. Yes.
Sim.
Yeah.
Sim?
Yes, yes. A Pamela, ela tem desenvolvido estudos na área de leitura, na área de compreensão leitora, de vocabulário, portanto na área de letramento, mas tendo em vista justamente dois pontos principais. A educação dessas populações vulneráveis, por isso o interesse dela pelo bilinguismo, pelas coisas que marcam a desigualdade nos Estados Unidos, né? As diferentes populações étnicas e, ao mesmo tempo, a educação nesses centros urbanos, né? Ao mesmo tempo, um outro interesse, que é o da formação, vamos ao programa.
A formação dos professores e a formação dos formadores de professores. Né? Uma coisa tão importante que a gente faz aqui, ainda com uma forma muito pouca, muito aquém do necessário, e ela vai, de certa forma, abordar dois temas aqui hoje, aqui no Cenpec, amanhã lá na Fundação. Vocês todos, se quiserem participar, estão convidados também. Eu sei que alguns já estão de fato, mas eu estou estendendo o convite, que é o assunto da tutoria em educação. E foi assim que eu entrei em contato com o Pamela pela primeira vez, porque preciso dizer de onde eu venho. Eu não sou pedagoga nem educadora por estudo. Eu sou porque eu trabalho na área de educação há 25 anos como gestora, né? Então, eu acho que é o único lugar no mundo, neste plano, que a gente pode causar algum impacto com a educação. Eu deixei de ser engenheira e passei a ser uma pessoa que trabalha com a educação básica, né? Então, esse ano eu entrei em contato com o Pamela pelas mãos de Dutti, que estava comigo num evento lá em Harvard, chamado ProLer, que é um evento de a gente entender melhor esse processo de leitura, aprendizagem das crianças pequenas, de educação infantil e de educação dos primeiros anos do fundamental. E Pamela estava na plateia de uma visita que a gente fez a uma escola bilíngue, né? Esse interesse que ela tem do estudo e do trabalho com as crianças de periferia, da nossa periferia, que não é a periferia deles, a deles é o centro, é o inverso. E nós estávamos falando exatamente de uma escola que me fascinou muito, porque eu trabalhei com uma escola bilíngue aqui no Brasil. E aí eu fui ver uma escola bilíngue em Boston, e onde eles ensinam em espanhol e em inglês ao mesmo tempo, na escola chamada Amigos School. Foi assim que eu conheci Pamela, e aí surgiu essa oportunidade de ouro dela vir para essa consultoria do CAED, que a gente agradece, e para trazê-la para falar depois do segundo assunto, que vai ser falado amanhã, que são as comunidades de aprendizagem profissional, que é um conceito embutido nas comunidades de prática. Passo de volta para você, senhor mineiro. Uma baiana e mineiro falando aqui em São Paulo, né? Presta atenção, olha só.
Vamos lixar.
Vamos lixar agora.
Eu acho que a única coisa importante dizer é que a Pamela Mason é professora da Universidade de Harvard. Ela dirige o mestrado em leitura e linguagem da universidade, no laboratório de leitura também da universidade, e que ela concilia, uma das coisas muito legais do trabalho dela, ela conciliou esse trabalho hoje, esse trabalho na universidade, depois de anos e anos como professora e como diretora de escola, o que faz com que todo o seu trabalho seja marcado por uma preocupação em como fazer com que o diretor da escola seja um líder ou tenha um papel extremamente relevante na formação dos seus professores e na criação de uma comunidade ou de uma cultura no interior da escola que promova não só o aprendizado dos alunos e a formação dos seus próprios, dos professores e do conjunto dos educadores.
Que seja aquilo que a gente deseja, um gestor da aprendizagem.
Isso.
Né?
Então é um prazer, Pamela. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here back in Brazil. This is my first time in São Paulo, but I have been to Minas, I have been to Juiz de Fora, Tiradentes, Ouro Preto, São João, Belo Horizonte, and Bahia and Salvador. So I am learning all parts of Brazil, and when I come on vacation, and every time I come, I visit schools. My daughter is a high school English teacher, and she says her mother is weird. When she goes on vacation, she visits schools. And she talks to teachers, and she talks to principals, and that's her idea of a good time. So that is my idea of a good time, so I hope that we all have a good time today. Thank you. As Antonio told you, I have been a teacher. I have been a curriculum director, so I have written curriculum. I've done a lot of professional development with teachers. And then I realized that the person who makes things happen in schools is the principal. So I said, I want to be one of those. So then I became a school principal for 19 years. And I would tell my teachers, the good news is, your principal is a reading teacher. The bad news is, your principal is a reading teacher. So if you're not teaching reading, I will know that you're not teaching it well. And so I am always wanting to be not only in the academy, but also in the schools. So part of my work in teaching reading specialist candidates is to supervise them in the schools. So I visit my candidates 3 times each semester, and I tell them that that's the best part of my day, is going into schools and seeing them working with children and working with teachers. So this year, in terms of my talk, I was engaged in being a literacy coach in one of the schools in the Cambridge Public Schools. And so it was my time to not only, as we say, talk the talk, but walk the talk. So I will share as I go through the public narrative on how I implemented that theoretical framework in the work that I did in the Cambridge Public Schools this past year. I like dialogue, so if you have a question, I'll put my headset on and I will listen to the translation, and I want this to be interactive, and really it won't serve my purposes to talk at you. I want to talk with you, so I want this to be a dialogue. All right? Okay, good. So the title of my talk is Instructional Coaching, Coaching as a Public Narrative, Motivation, Strategy, and Action. I think that those 3 aspects are very important. You need to be motivated, you need to have a strategy, and then you need to act on the strategy. Without the 3, it really doesn't make any sense. So in terms of the context, UNESCO says that 83% of the teachers from Colombia, Costa Rica, and Mexico are trained. And the training really is very different from nation to nation and from state to state within our nations. So that it's very important to think about who our audience is. And our audience, for me, is always the teacher. Because the teacher has the first, the last, and the most impact on the learning of students. So when we think about changing teacher behavior, we always think about changing hearts and minds. We hear that a lot in the military. We're going to a country and we're going to change their hearts and minds. While in terms of teacher development, the research from Dusky shows us that we don't change the hearts and minds first. We need to change their actions through professional development. So in providing professional development, then we change the teacher's practice in the classroom. And then when we change the teacher's practice in the classroom for the better, we change student outcomes. And once we change student outcomes, then we change the hearts and minds. We change their beliefs. And I know that this was it's a counter-narrative to what we think. We want people to believe first, and to have a pedagogical conversion of some spiritual magnitude, and then they will go off and be better teachers. But we have a state in the United States and Missouri called Missouri, and their motto is "Show me." And I think that that's what this theoretical framework shows us, is that we have to show teachers that changes in their pedagogy will result in better student outcomes. Then they will change their beliefs about change. So let's go and think about this public narrative. What are the components of it? And then we will explore it in detail. The first is the story of self. It is why we individually come to this work. Why are we in education? Why do we believe that education is important? Why we believe that we have a role in education. So it's all about our values. So the second aspect is the story of us. All too often, at least in the United States, teachers say, "I'm closing my door, and I have my children, and I'm happy." But there has to be a story of us. What brings all of the teachers together within a school? What makes that school a culture of learning? How people interact within that school, whether it be the individual teachers or the support personnel within the school. That has to be the story of us. So the story of us is really, why are we collectively in this work together? What are our shared values? What are our shared missions? What are our shared goals? And the sharing of why we do what we do. The third aspect of the public narrative from Marshall Ganz's work is the story of now. Why is our collective work important? Now, for those of you who are steeped in educational research, you know that the PISA indicates that we, regardless of our country, aren't doing such a really good job, especially in literacy, that we have a lot of improvement to make. And so that is, for me, my moral imperative, that we need to create literate students who will change the world for the better. That means economically, that means culturally, that means environmentally. And so we want them to be critical consumers of knowledge and critical creators of knowledge. And so that, for me, is the moral imperative of the story of now. So this is the theoretical framework that I will use to hook my presentation on for the rest of our time together. So if you have any questions, just please answer. So we want to engage children in learning, and that is why we are about what we do. And these are teachers from the ADA program in Costa Rica, Amigos del Aprendizaje, and they have a very good system of coaching. And so they're an NGO, and they send coaches out to the school. And here's some photographs that I took in Costa Rica. So let's again think about effective professional development and how instructional coaching fits into that paradigm. So there are a lot of teachers are doing a lot of good things in classrooms, but there are things that are being done one at a time. And that may feel good for the teacher, and that may be good for those students, but we have to remember that students move every year to a new teacher. And should they be starting all over again? Should they be starting anew? Or should there be some cohesion in the developmental process of their education? I believe that there should, and if there should, that means that teachers need to talk to each other. And teachers need to share a common instructional language so that the children understand that what they did in first grade is the foundation for what they're going to do in second grade. And that it's not just somebody wiped the slate clean and I'm starting all over again. So that this will really focus on literacy coaching, but it can be around any kind of coaching. But literacy is my background, and so that's what I'm going to really focus on, is the literacy coaching aspect. Right, so we have the story of self in terms of professional development. We're all egoists. Sorry, I hate to break it to you, but you know, we all have an ego and we all think we're the most important person in the world. Okay? Yeah. We thought we outgrew it when we were 6 years old, but we just pretended we outgrew it. All right? So that professional development should be ongoing. So it's not just I go and hear it and then I walk away and, you know, who cares if I do it, if I don't do it, but it needs to be part of how we think about our own development. It needs to be job embedded, so it needs to be related to what I'm doing. What are my problems of practice here and now with these students? It needs to be non-evaluative, and that's a very important part of coaching. And I've been asking about your directors of instruction and what their role is, and I'm hearing that they're somewhat managerial, they're somewhat supervisory, and they can be evaluative. But in the true coaching model, you have to have someone who's not evaluating you. They can help you evaluate your own practice, answer your own questions about your practice, but there's no scurrying down the hallway to report to the principal that Pamela has no idea how to teach main idea because she told me so. So that is not a good way to start coaching. So in terms of improving instruction, once we get into this, they want, why do we want to improve? Because we want our students to do better. I believe that every morning, every teacher wakes up and says, I want to do well by my students. I just can't believe that teachers can wake up and say, I'm going to be the worst teacher in the world today. Or the worst cab driver, or the worst banker, or the worst principal. Everybody comes into it afresh and anew, trying to think about what they can do to increase student achievement. They also want to get students to do well not only within the classroom and be engaged in their learning, but they want to see outcomes. Again, those people from Missouri, show me. So you're saying that you're a great teacher, well, where's the proof? For better or for worse, the proof is in our data assessments. Our informal, formative data assessments that we as teachers may use in the classroom, but also in the state and national assessments. In the United States, we have our what we call high stakes testing. And believe me, they are high stakes. We are now in an era where the school-wide results can involve teachers being fired. We are looking at teacher evaluation as we call value added. So if you don't show as a teacher that your students are doing better than they did when they started out in your classroom, that can be part, not the total, but part of your evaluation. So again, ego, there's something in it for you to get the children to do well. But we want it to be more than teaching to the test. We want them the children to be really actively engaged and excited about learning. Because when you're excited about doing something, you put your effort into it, you want to do it better. If you're not excited about doing something, you're just doing it to be doing it, you know, like washing the dishes, then you just do them to get them done. But, you know, if you're really excited about doing something, then you really look at your effort and you improve wonderfully from year to year. Then we have lower dropout rates. You know, a lot of children in the United States are leaving school. Because, and the work that we've done around asking students why they left school was not because school was hard. They were bored. They just didn't see what was going on in the classroom, how that had anything to do with their future or their present. And so they dropped out. But this really impacts us economically. It really does lower our productivity as an industrialized and in the United States more service-oriented, more technology-oriented economy. So we need these creative students to be in our classes, and we need not to, as we say, bore them to tears. And we clearly want teachers to be more satisfied. Again, they want to feel a sense of agency and a sense of efficacy, that what they're doing is making a positive difference in students' lives. So, how does this happen? We have to have relationships in schools, and this is where the theoretical framework of a public narrative comes into play. So I know that I'm very type A. I tell all my students I am very type A. I want to get to the end. I want to get to the product. But what I'm learning more and more is that the process of getting to the product is probably more important. And a lot of my students complain now that I've had this conversion that you're not telling me what to do. You're not telling me how to teach phonics. You're not telling me how to teach comprehension. You're telling me what phonics looks like, what comprehension should look like. And you're at 30,000 feet. I'm down here on the ground. And I tell them, I think it's more important for you to know why you're teaching something than what. You can pick up any book and figure out the what. But then if you know why you're teaching something, then you can be more strategic around your teaching. You can differentiate your instruction better for those children who are soaring and doing much better than you think they should have been doing, and for those children who are struggling, because you know why you're teaching it, and therefore you can be much more flexible in why you're doing what you're doing. So we have these teacher relationships in schools, and having been a school principal for 19 years, I have witnessed all of them. So the first one is where, like in children in the sandbox, they're playing in parallel. You know, they're all teaching, but then they may be 6 inches apart, but they're not talking to each other. They're just doing their own thing. So that's parallel play. Then we have adversarial relationships. I know it's hard to believe that in schools you cannot even think that people might not get along. Well, I hear some chuckles that tell me otherwise. Maybe some of you have experienced this. I have experienced as a principal teachers talking about another teacher, that she was cold, hard to get along with, didn't like the parents because her classroom doors were closed in the morning and other people's doors were open. And oh my goodness, if you had your child in her classroom, oh, I'm so sorry, it'll get better next year. And I said, okay, I've got to get to the bottom of this. And you know, I'm that kind of a person, so I just walked up and said, could you explain to me why your doors are closed in the morning? She said, Dr. Mason, I have a corner room. I'm near the door of the school. If I keep my doors open, my classroom gets cold. I said, well, that makes perfectly good sense. You're not cold and unwelcoming. You just want your students to be warm when they get in their classroom. So I just started this little, communication subversion. I said, do you know why her doors are closed? Did you ever ask her why her doors are closed? It's because her classroom gets cold because she's right on the corner and there's this cross ventilation. And people went, oh, okay, you can come in. Just because the door's closed doesn't mean that you can't come in. And all of a sudden, the parents started to come in and the other teachers are going, What's going on over there? Looks like people are smiling. People are happy. Maybe I can't talk bad about her anymore. But of course that never happens in any of the schools that you know. And then we move into what we call congenial relationships. Where, how are you? How was your weekend? Oh, I like your scarf, Josie. That's so nice. Oh, where did you get this sweater? That's great. Did you have a good time at the barbecue this weekend? So we're talking to each other. And we're being very nice, and people might walk down the hallway and say, oh, wow, everybody in this school gets along really, really well. But it's really kind of, as we say, an inch deep and a mile wide. There's really no substance to it. And then finally, we get into our collaborative relationships, where we are collegial and we're talking about the work. And it's very important that we have those collegial relationships where we're congenial, where we're being nice to each other. But it's more important that we get down and dig a little deeper and are really willing to talk about the work. And that does take a lot of community building and a lot of culture building and a lot of trust building. And that's where this public narrative and the story of self, us, and now come into play. Because it's very important to create that respect of each other's public narrative in order to move to this very collegial relationship where people are talking about the work in an open way. Not in a way that says, I can do it better than you, and I'm keeping that secret in my pocket, and it's mine to have. You know, as I used to say, it's mine to have, let's see, how to say it, it's mine, and it's your business to find out. All right? So, I'm not sharing at all. So we have to have these partnerships, and I believe that the instructional coach, in this case the literacy coach, can be the broker of these collegial and collaborative relationships. And that's why I think it's so important that this role be in every school. In the United States, they're not in every school, so don't think that you're behind in getting this started. You're not. We have this wonderful pendulum as in the United States where, you know, our literacy scores were bad, so everybody got a literacy coach. Everybody talked about the work of teaching literacy. The literacy scores went up. And then what do you think happened? Oh, we don't need literacy coaches. We know how to do that. So then all of a sudden, you know, we were needing to find budget money. So we said, oh, well, we're good in literacy now. We don't need those coaches. And we got rid of them. Okay, so what do you think happened next? The literacy scores went down. So we went, here's the pendulum. Scores up, good literacy coaching, no coaching. The scores go down. So then, you know, you have teachers thinking, okay, how much change can I take in my career? So we do hope that just because these scores go up, that people will see the value of maintaining those coaching relationships. So let's think about some ways teachers can partner. Right, so we're going to talk about Knight's work in terms of coming to the story of us. So we've talked about the story of self, why professional development is important to each individual teacher, and we're going to move into the story of us. How do we partner? How do we partner and use the literacy coach as a facilitator of these partnerships? So we have to think about being equal. It's very important that the literacy coach, the instructional coach, be seen as an equal among us. That there is nothing too big or too little that a classroom teacher does that a literacy coach can't do. Now, unfortunately, sometimes because the literacy coach isn't assigned to a classroom, that means that the literacy coach becomes a substitute teacher. or the literacy coach becomes the person who watches the students when they're waiting for the bus. Or, so they have these little administrative jobs, and so that's very seductive, but it does erode the effectiveness of the literacy coach when they are asked to do those other non-instructional tasks. There has to be some choice. As we say to our coaches, and I train coaches at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, start with the willing. You want to start working with teachers who are receptive to the idea of collaboration. And then, as happened with that teacher that everybody was talking bad about, they say, that doesn't seem so scary. Nothing bad happened. The sky didn't fall down. All the books didn't fall off the shelves. And the teachers and the students are still coming to school, so this literacy coaching must be okay. They have to have a voice. So the classroom teacher is the one who drives the agenda of the relationship between the coach and him or herself. The teacher is the one who decides what problem of practice they have that they want the coach to help them work through. So it really is self-selected professional development. Ongoing, job embedded, but self-selected, job embedded. Then there has to be time for reflection. My students always laugh at me because after every lesson, they have to write a reflection. After every part of every lesson, they write a reflection. And then at the end of every lesson, they write a reflection about every student in their group. And then they talk to the classroom teacher and they write a reflection. In fact, one group of my students did a kind of a top 10 list, top 10 reasons you know that you're in Pamela Mason's class. And then you said, you reflect about everything. Your significant other asks you, do you want coffee? And you have to reflect about it. You have to reflect about making the decision, you have to reflect about the decision, and you have to reflect after you make the decision. But I think that is a habit of mind. We're in this 24/7 news cycle, living cycle. Everybody's wanting to know what we think, but there's no time to think about what we think. People send you emails, and then you get another email. Did you read my email? I just got your email. Can I read it and think about it? But we're just in this, Oh, I know. Angela has no idea what I'm talking about. No idea. So that it has to be reflective. So the coach has time to think about what are the strategies that will be most effective for this particular teacher at this particular time. Because everything needs to be thought about that way. This particular teacher at this particular time. Where is that teacher developmentally in terms of his or her pedagogy? Where is that teacher developmentally in terms of his or her willingness or ability to make change? And how can we sustain the change? Because there's nothing worse than having a teacher try something, back to that Gusky model of professional development, and student outcomes not be good, and then the teacher turn around to the coach and say, I told you so. I told you it wasn't going to work. You should have listened to me. We wasted all this time. I told you it wasn't going to work. So it has to be very reflective. And then we have to have that dialogue. So I can't come in and coach you and say, oh, that was great, bye, and you not see me for another 3 weeks. Really has to be part of a dialogue. Well, how do you think it went? What do you think went well? I think that we can try this next. Where do we want to go? So it's very important that it become part of a dialogue, an ongoing conversation. And sometimes that conversation can be expanded. So it's between the literacy coach and a classroom teacher, but that literacy coach may know that there's another classroom teacher who's experiencing the same challenge, the same problem of practice. And so when the time is right, I might say, you might talk to Ms. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so across the hall. They've been having the same problems and they've tried some things that might work for you. Why don't you talk about it so that the circle of influence becomes larger? And then finally, we need to think about the praxis. You know, what are we doing that is going to make this knowledge expand